traveling with Secretary of State Kerry. Joining me now, Congresswoman Barbara Lee. You heard from a moment ago. She's been a vocal opponent of both the Afghanistan and Iraq war. She joins me now. Always good to talk to you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And let's start with something new we heard this morning from former Vice President Dick Cheney talking about President Obama's approach to the region. Let's take a listen, and I'll bring you in.
I think he's dead wrong in terms of the course he's taken this nation, and I think we're in for big trouble in the years ahead because of his refusal to recognize reality and because of his continual emphasis upon getting the U.S. basically to withdraw from that part of the world.
Well, you're not, at this point, certainly you tried to defund. You wanted to make sure there was no funding for the further military action. Do you think the president is dead wrong as well in considering military options in Iraq?
I just have to say, first of all, Dick Cheney and President Bush, they were dead wrong. They misled the American public in 2002. They told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That opened Pandora's box, and now we see regional instability, regional conflicts that are sectarian, they're historical, and it's really a shame and disgrace that the former vice president continues to try to mislead the public with his proposals and his condemnation, really, of President Obama's strategy. The president is doing absolutely the right thing. We have to have regional engagement, regional cooperation. There's no military solution in Iraq. The Iraqis must lead a political solution in this entire sectarian strife. That's the only way it's going to be dealt with, and that's the only way we're going to see some regional stability.
And I think a lot of people, most people would agree with you that, yes, there has to be a political solution here, but you're trying to make sure there's no funding for anything further in Iraq. So I guess my question here is really about the military option that the president is leaving on the table. You want to make sure that he comes and gets congressional approval, or do you just want no military intervention in any way, shape, or form in Iraq? He's already said no boots on the ground, but as far as military strikes, the 300 advisors that are on the ground right now.
Let me say, this week we debated the Defense Appropriations Bill. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee, and I had several amendments that basically said the president, first of all, we would not commit U.S. tax dollars to boots on the ground to combat troops in Iraq. Secondly, this authorization has been on the books, mind you, for 12 years. It's now time to update it. If the president desires and believes that military action should take place, it's absolutely essential that he come to Congress for a debate so that the American public can weigh in on this. 73% of the American people say no, they're war weary, and so we have to encourage the president to come to Congress if, in fact, he decides to take military action.
You said encourage him to come to Congress. I just want to make sure we're completely on the same page here. Not just come for counsel. You think he needs your approval, or you would want him to get congressional approval before taking such action?
Absolutely. The Congress has its constitutional responsibility to engage in. We've really abdicated it for the last 12, 13 years. We need a full debate. If, in fact, the president decides to use force, he needs to come forward. New authorization. We need to understand and hear the facts from the president, and we need to vote on an authorization. Consulting with Congress is one thing, but this authorization, which I'm trying to repeal, has been on the books for 12 years. It needs to be, as I said earlier, it needs to be updated, it needs to be debated, and then the Congress can decide what type of action to move forward with. We need to exercise our constitutional responsibility. The president, as commander-in-chief, has every single option on the table, as always, if there's an imminent threat or if he thinks that the United States is in danger. And so it's up to members of Congress now to exercise our constitutional responsibility and do the right thing.
And I want to point out, and you kind of alluded to this, but I want to point out to our viewers something that you did write this week, saying, in explaining your position, saying we must recognize that no military solution in Iraq, any lasting solution, must be political and take into account all the Iraqis. Bombs will only inflame the situation by injuring civilians and creating new enemies for the U.S. What can we do to help Iraq at this point? The government doesn't seem to have the ability right now. A centralized government doesn't seem to have the ability, and a lot of people will argue the government of Nur al-Maliki is actually responsible for getting us where we are or where Iraq is at this point. So what should the U.S. be doing with that government? What can that government do to rein in that fighting?
I think Secretary Kerry, the president, they're exactly right on target. They're insisting that the Iraqis come together and decide their future. We have to encourage that. We must support that. We need to make sure that the Iraqis understand we want to see the end of sectarian violence, but also religious freedoms, respect for human rights, respect for women, respect for children. There are many issues that need to be on the table, but the Iraqis have to put, and the leadership in Iraq must pull together all of the ethnic groups, you know, all of the factions and all of the people who have been out so far in the whole government structure. And so we need to encourage that. We need to encourage democratic reforms. And in fact, I think the president is doing the right thing. But believe you me, inserting ourselves into a military conflict that's sectarian, that would put our young men and women in harm's way, that would put boots on the ground, combat operations in play, it's just wrong. It won't work. We saw what happened when Dick Cheney and President Bush authorized shock and awe. If you remember that,
of course.
We've lost so many of our young men and women, brave young men and women, who did everything we asked them to do. We wasted, I tell you, $25 billion just on the security forces in Iraq. And look at what is taking place now with the security forces. So American tax dollars need to be spent prudently, and we need to really encourage this political settlement.
Congresswoman Barbara Lee, always good to talk to you. Thanks, as always. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
My pleasure.
All right, we're about 10 minutes past the hour here now. And up next, the political implications of the crisis in Iraq. How much should the U.S. get involved in helping fight ISIS? Our brain trust coming up. Also, make sure you join Morning Joe's Mika Brzezinski tomorrow, a one-on-one interview with the president. Tomorrow, right here on MSNBC.